Well, this would be the Confessions podcast, and thank you for downloading some more terrible tales, courtesy of the Radio 2 listener. You'll be amazed at the bad stuff that they do. This week we have a seriously sorry sound engineer, a flatulent, fraudulent footballer. It's actually a flagrant, fraudulent footballer, but I thought flatulent might entice you a bit more. A train-travelling travesty and some disgraceful Dalek devilry. See what you make of these. Now, this confession is interesting, not only because it's a good story, but there's also a mystery involved. And I'm not sure we're going to be at liberty to further the mystery, so it's going to be entirely up to you as to whether you wish to pursue the clues which I'm about to give you. It comes from the Reverend Gav. That's what it says, Rev Gav.
Okay.
Well, it says, actually say the Reverend Gav, it says Rev Gav, so that might mean anything. Might be his first name and his second name. Thank you, Rev Gav. Father Simon, it was the early 1990s, and I was the sound engineer in a digital recording studio. It was one of the first studios in the UK to use completely computer-based hardware to record bands, and the equipment was state-of-the-art. We boasted 3 gigabytes of hard disk space, and even had one of the first CD burners. I know. One week, a well-known rock band, who, as you will appreciate, will have to remain nameless, were in the studio recording their second album. So many clues. Late one evening, we'd finished recording all the instrument parts on a particular song: drums, bass and guitar. The control room was littered with empty beer bottles, and the lead singer, lead guitarist and drummer were crashed out on the plush leather sofas. The bass player from the band lived locally. Another clue. And as he had finished all his recording, he decided to take his bass guitars and amplifiers home, then come back later to listen to the rough mixes of the songs. I was sat at the computer workstation, says Rev Gab, reviewing the last session, and it was then that I made a very small but a very large mistake. With a single tap, I accidentally hit delete on the bass part of the last song we recorded. Oh, no. It was gone. It was completely erased permanently from the hard disk. This was in the days before undos and automatic backups. The last song now had no bass part, and I was mortified. I turned to the remaining 3 band members and confessed my mistake. The lead guitarist thought for a moment and said that he could probably play the bass part. We found an old bass guitar lying in a dusty corner of the studio, plugged it directly into the mixer, and there, in the control room, the lead guitarist laid down the entire bass part in one take. We had just stowed the bass guitar back in its dusty corner and were listening back to the song when the aforementioned bass player returned and entered the control room. The rest of the band and I sat there nervously waiting for the song to finish. However, when it did, before we could say anything, the bass player smiled and said, "Yeah, I nailed that, didn't I?" I think, actually, that's the best I've ever played, that bass part. He was so thrilled with it that I and the rest of the band exchanged glances, and we realised that we didn't have the heart to tell him that it wasn't him. To this day, he still believes that he played bass on that song. So I've lived with the guilt for 20 years, and I beg your forgiveness. I also beg forgiveness from bass players everywhere who will be horrified that such a thing could take place. I want to reassure them that they are valued members of rock bands. I also beg forgiveness from the record company that put out an album with the wrong credits. Finally, I beg forgiveness from all the fans that are unknowingly thinking that they're listening to a bass part played by the famous bass player, when in fact they're listening to the bass played by the lead guitarist. But no one has had the guts to come out and tell the bass player. Well, it's a great story anyway. Everyone's going, well, hang on, okay, so this is early 1990s, one of the first studios in the UK, and the bass player lives near the studio. Matt
we don't know where the studio is, though.
No, we don't. I mean, you can have a guess, I suppose. Matt's just written down, hang on, pass the note here. Oh, I see. Yeah, you might be right, actually. Let's not.
I won't say.
Anyway, so people are going to have various guesses. Early 90s, it's their second album. The bass player, clearly not that good. Well, not as good. Well, it's fine, we can say that.
No, we can say that.
As long as we don't say who the band are.
No, not to do
But he was the one saying it was really good. It wasn't everyone else saying, that's a better bass line than you normally play.
What I'm saying is the lead guitarist is a better bass player than the bass guitarist.
Or as good as.
Or as good as, who knows.
Or as bad as.
Anyway, let's...
It's a great tale, isn't it? I mean, the fact that it's a famous band, famous bass player, and it's all true, apparently. I'm sure it is. The bass player, if you're listening, you probably know who you are, I guess, given that Matt's guessed it. So, no, I think it's a great tale. I think that if Rev Gav had told the bass player, he would have been very upset, so it was better to keep it quiet.
Do you think the bass player would know that he's not the best bass player in the band?
I think definitely.
Matt's quite sure he knows who it is anyway.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Is he generally not very good? I think Rev Gav did the best thing he could have done in the circumstances, and the album went out. Nobody knew about it, so you're forgiven.
That's true. I mean, I genuinely don't know. So there's not as though I've taken the information out or anything. What do you think, Sister Bobby from the Priory?
Yeah, I think it's an easy one. The only thing that would make a difference is if the bass playing was really awful. To let him think he played an awful bass line would be a terrible thing to do. But it didn't. It sounds great. Everyone's happy. Please let us know, because I can't guess it.
He's still thinking. Yeah, listen to my bass line. Aren't I good?
I nailed that. Yeah.
Nailed that.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think?
Well, here's the thing. Everyone in bands knows that everyone always laughs at the drummer. But basically, I've always thought the bassist is just above that. That everyone says, oh, the bassist can't play. Which is actually not true. The bassist role is always the most difficult, I think. But what this story tells us is, why on earth are we still going on with this idea that you hit one delete button and everything's gone? And unbelievably, that still happens now. One delete button, it's all gone. And that's progress.
Well, only in the early 90s.
No, that still happens now.
Does
it? Yeah,
it's always a little
absolutely.
Bin. You can take it out of the bin
now. No.
How do you know?
Because something's happened on this show where something's disappeared because of one person hitting delete.
Who's it?
And I'm not even looking at Rebecca.
That's a confession in itself.
At all. And for that, I am going to forgive.
Did you mess it up for Matt?
I don't know what he's talking about. What are you talking about?
I think everyone in the room knows what I'm talking about.
Dear Father Simon and his merry men and women, this comes from Tony. I too have a guilty secret. Listening to your programme made me realise that perhaps if I owned up, if I confessed, if forgiveness had been granted to many who had done wrong before me, then maybe I too could be pardoned, and it might even earn me a few brownie points for my twilight days. In April 1982, on my honeymoon, my wife and I went to Tenerife, and we stayed in a lovely hotel in the resort of Puerto de la Cruz. I've just remembered I was going to check some Spanish pronunciation with Matt, and it was too late now. After a few days of soaking up the sunshine and trekking up to the top of Mount Teeder, something like that, we got chatting to staff around the pool. On the recommendation of a hotel staff member, we decided to go visit a bar and restaurant in an area usually populated only by the locals. Very few tourists ever strayed far from the waterfront promenade. We were told that this place served terrific food with a true Spanish atmosphere and very reasonable too. Not like the others that charge big money for fast food on the seafront. Well, we caught a taxi together with another couple who we met, and they were also on honeymoon, and we went to this local backstreet Nirvana. When we arrived, it was a street full of townhouses, and the driver said, no, it's fine. Assured us if you go up the flight of stairs, wound up the side of the last terrace road house, everything will be fine. And we walked up the stairs into this extraordinary bar. It seemed incredibly lively, and my wife and our friends, we found a table. I made my way to the bar to see what was cooking and to buy some drinks. But each step I took brought about a reduction in the chatter going around the bar. And by the time I actually got there and asked for 2 local beers, a white wine and a vodka and coke, there was total silence. An unnatural hush had fallen on the taverna. The bartender threw me a strange look, and I wondered if I had grown another head or something. We gate-crashed some private party, and it had all been an elaborate hoax by the hotel staff. Maybe we weren't welcome. Maybe we'd been set up. Maybe they just hated the British. Anyway, just at the right moment, and to my great relief, the barman cracked an enormous smile, a huge grin, and shouted, best Spanish accent, please, Simon.
Yes, here it comes. Go on.
Hola a todos, mira que es que el futbolista English.
Wow, okay. So, look everyone, it's an English footballer.
There you go, how good was my Spanish? The whole place erupted in the same way it did for the old Milky Bar kid in the adverts, and there was a lot of backslapping and handshaking. Top Spanish accent again now, Simon, because here comes the barman announcing who the footballer is. He says, "It's Trevor Brooking! See, Trevor Brooking!" They had mistaken me for the West Ham United and England football legend, the great...
Which one have they mistaken him for?
Sir Trevor Brooking.
Oh, that one, yeah.
In case you thought it was anyone else. though he wasn't a sir at the time, obviously. A big leap for many to take, I know, but back in 1982, I was younger and slimmer and had hair and could easily have been mistaken for the great man. Well, despite my protestations, they would have nothing of it. They truly believed that I was Sir Trevor, and that by denying it, I was only trying to remain anonymous and humble and protect my wife and friends, which is the kind of thing you could imagine Sir Trevor would do, because he's that kind of guy. The more I said that I was not who they thought I was, the more they winked and said, "Okay, Signor Trevor, okay." Because they were from France. So the rest of the evening, we all drank and ate, and it never cost us one peseta. I might have mentioned a couple of FA Cup finals I played in, and scoring the winner in 1980 against Arsenal. I'm not sure. But I would like to ask the congregation to pass judgment and decide whether I can be forgiven. Not for all the food and drink that was consumed on that night, but to all those good Spanish guys who either have photographs on their walls taken with Trevor Brooking in April 1982 or autographs on napkins, shirts, coasters and postcards that they proudly show to children, grandchildren as cherished heirlooms. I am truly sorry, and I hope that you find forgiveness for this unintended deception that has laid heavy with me for the last 30 years. It wasn't Sir Trevor, it was just plain old Tony. That's who it was. But he said, no, I'm not. Yeah, si, Senor Trevor. Hola a todos. What does that mean? What's that mean?
Hello, everyone.
Oh, really? That's
Hola a todos, sí.
Mira que es que el futbolista.
Mira, es el futbolista, Sir Trevor Brooking.
There you go. Exactly the way I said it.
It feels like we're in Spain. I'm
It's
really confused.
It's uncanny, isn't it?
It is uncanny.
Sister Rebecca, what do you think?
I think it's a great confession. I love the way that he was trying to tell them it wasn't him, and then at some point he obviously just thought, I'll start signing some napkins, and it doesn't really matter. I want to know at what point in the evening that was. But also, why were they kind of a bit nasty when he first turned up?
No, I think they all went quiet.
Because yeah, but why?
Well, maybe they were thinking, oh my goodness, can it be? Can
do you
it really,
think that's
can
what they
it
were
really
thinking?
be Sir
Yes,
Trevor?
that's true. So good on the barman, and I think, anyone would have done the same, Tony. So you're forgiven.
Bobby from the Priory.
Yeah, there's no deception, because they kept saying, we're not, and they went, okay. So
But in
absolutely.
the end, he obviously thought, oh, okay. Then.
Yeah. And I said the deception was their own, not his. So you are totally forgiven.
So it was their fault. It was the Spanish,
Completely
all the Spaniards' fault. Yes.
Yeah. And also they enjoyed it. They could tell everyone, guess who came to our bar? People would be coming the next night. It would only boom their business, wouldn't it?
Everyone had a fabulous time, Brother Matthew. Nothing could have gone wrong.
It is worth saying that Trevor Brooking is one of the nice guys in football, so I'm sure he would have no problem at all with this particular confession. It's also worth bearing, if this takes place in 1982,
yes,
Trevor Brooking doesn't have the greatest memory of the 1982 World Cup because, of course, he gets brought on very late in a game that really he should have started.
Oh, interesting
Him and Kevin Keegan. And for that reason alone, I'm going to forgive, because I'm sure if Sir Trevor was here with us tonight, I'm sure he'd also forgive.
Is that right?
Yes,
okay.
I'm sure.
Dear Father Simon and the Fellowship of Forgivers, I have decided to... Interesting pictures with today's story. I have decided to send in my tale of shame following your story of the travellers on the Paris train just the other day. They were from America, as you might imagine. Many years ago, when I was young and slim, my husband was working in a sales role, and one year his company offered their top sales staff the chance to earn a trip on the Venice Simplon Orient Express from London to Innsbruck. This, as you can imagine, was a wonderful opportunity, and he really went for it. He duly worked his socks off to earn this treat, and after a lot of super salesman-like activity, achieved all of his targets. He won his gold star, and he was duly selected as one of the chosen few. Suitably thrilled, we planned our wardrobes for this trip of a lifetime. The brochure promised one of the world's finest travelling experiences. This is sounding fabulous. Suitcases packed, off we went. As anyone who's been on this magnificent train will know, it is very plush, an Art Deco icon, none no less, and also old-fashioned as far as things such as engineering are concerned. Now, it was a very humid afternoon, and as we were back in our delightfully vintage cabin, changing for dinner, I realised that in order to close the window blind, the window itself had to be closed first. It was also incredibly warm, and I was reluctant to do this, as there was no other way of air conditioning the room. At this point, we were travelling through rural France. No stations in sight, just farmland for mile after mile, kilometre after kilometre. So I thought that we would be perfectly fine to leave the blind and also, therefore, the window open.
Yeah, I can't see that being a problem. That's not going to be a problem.
Deborah continues, I was to wear a strapless evening dress that night, so this necessitated the removal of all clothing above the waist in order to change. My husband was busy at the sink in the corner, clipping his nails and generally performing his ablutions, so I stood in the middle of the cabin, stripped off, and fetched the dress carrier with my evening gown in it. As I removed the dress from the bag, I sensed the train slowing down, so I turned to see why, just as we were making stately progress through a tiny, out-of-the-way station. It was, as you would imagine, for a tiny, out-of-the-way station, totally deserted. Apart from the elderly French gentleman, all sitting patiently on the platform, waiting for a local service. By the time I had realised what was happening, it was too late to do anything other than smile and wave sweetly at the gentleman concerned as we passed slowly by. It is fair to say their eyes were on stalks. One waved, one pointed, and the other looked as though he might need treatment, and also that he might never play ball ever again. But they were, I have to say, by some margin, the biggest smiles I saw that trip, as you can imagine. Did you see that? Was that? Obviously in French. Father Simon, I wish to ask forgiveness from the Orient Express Company, as I would hate to think that the good people of rural France, all of them, were somehow led to believe that the goings-on that august and respectable train were in any way risque. And actually, all it was doing is Deborah, she was just changing. That's all she was doing. And there's some guys in there going, oh, all right, that's different.
I'm sure Deborah made their year. I'm sure they were absolutely delighted
They might talk about that now.
Exactly.
Still, do you remember that fine evening?
So even if they thought that Orient Express was a bit, dodgy, I think that's counterbalanced by the fact that they were so delighted by that experience. So I think, you've got to forgive.
I reckon there were probably crowds on the platform the next day waiting for a
yes,
repeat performance.
Exactly. So definitely forgiven.
Sister Bobby from the Priory.
It wasn't the sort of local service that those gentlemen were expecting, was it really?
Well, I certainly don't think so, no.
All you can say is well done. I mean, it wasn't the product of forethought,
no.
Which in some ways seems a bit of a shame if she'd meant to do it. Absolute forgiven. I can see no harm done.
I just like the fact that she just smiled and waved rather than went, ooh. Brother Matthew.
I'm placing money that those guys at some point in the future said, does anyone fancy coming down the station? Should we just go down the station? Any reason?
You never know what's going to happen.
You never know. Remember the last time? Whoa,
Don't worry about us. We're just fine. We're just off to the station.
Fine. I'll just go on my own. So I obviously
Can
would
I
have been...
come with you?
No,
we're fine.
No need. Yes, I think for that reason we're obviously going to forgive.
Father Simon and the Forgivers. Being a 12-year-old in the 1970s, the best thing on television was clearly and obviously, and without dispute, Doctor Who. The Daleks instilled terror into every impressionable child, and who could have been more impressionable than my 5-year-old brother, Martin? After watching the film Daleks Invading Earth, his terror was complete. As far as he was now concerned, the possibility of Daleks patrolling the streets of Morecambe, where we lived, was now a reality. He would check under his bed, out of the window, behind the curtains, under the stairs, and in his wardrobe, morning and night. Well, you've been doing a lot of sibling rivalry on your confessions feature. Here's mine. As luck would have it, we had a black torch that looked remarkably like the seeing eye of a Dalek. We lived in the only house on a short, dark cul-de-sac. I positioned the torch poking out through the bushes at the end of this cul-de-sac, and at breakfast the next morning I told Martin that indeed his worst fears had been realised. Not only had Daleks invaded the Earth, but they had in fact taken over the Hallmark Hotel at the end, which is situated at the end of our road. He didn't want to believe that something so utterly terrible had happened, and happily allowed himself to be led towards the protruding torch. When the awful reality of the Dalek's eye became obvious, he ran straight back home, never getting close enough to see what it really was. Breakfast over, and being a Saturday, we were due to be piled into the family Volvo for the weekly trip to Fine Fair.
Fine Fair.
There's a supermarket. You don't get referred to that often. Realising that my plan would be foiled when we drove past, I nipped out to retrieve the torch first. But the day was saved. There was a large stone by the side of the pavement. A bright idea popped into my head. I picked up the stone and gouged heavy, parallel scratch marks leading all the way to the Hallmark Hotel. On the way into town, Martin peered anxiously through the car backseat window. The immediate absence of any signs of Dalek life was a little reassuring for him, but he carefully checked the fine fare aisles and the car park. He hid behind the fish fingers for 10 minutes, hid behind our car for another 10 minutes. On our return home, he scampered inside and checked all the rooms again. He seemed to think that the coast was now clear, but he hadn't been too observant, had he? It remained for me, his responsible older brother, to take him outside and examine the road. Yes, where the wheel marks were left by the departing Daleks, leading all the way to their headquarters, the Hallmark Hotel, by now a nest of Dalek activity, if that indeed is the collective noun for Daleks. Is that a nest of Daleks?
It'll do.
There almost certainly is a collective noun for Daleks, and someone will be telling us.
Could be a gaggle of Daleks.
For many days, excuse me, I have to tell you, Father Simon, for many days he refused to leave the house. When he finally explained his terror to my mother, I was soundly thrashed.
Different times, everyone.
Different times. That's exactly what it's
Different times.
Different times. Obviously, don't try this at home, parents. So, Father Simon, and the forgiving few, I would like to apologise to Martin for spoiling his enjoyment of all future Doctor Who episodes and my mother's faith in me as a role model for my younger brother. Deluded, obviously, but anyway. There you go. It's another sibling rivalry tale, but a little bit of ingenuity there in making Martin think that the Daleks had in fact invaded Morecambe, and particularly the Hallmark Hotel. What do you think, Sister Rebecca?
It was a very elaborate wind-up, wasn't it? Not only did he go out and put the torch out there, but he also did the track marks.
Gouging the track,
yeah,
yes.
I think he could have traumatised his little brother for life,
he did,
actually. I
which
think
is why
he
got
probably did.
Actually, he's suffered enough, hasn't he?
Exactly, that's one way of looking at it. So he's already had his punishment. But I think the fact that he was 12 and his brother was only 5 means there was enough of an age gap. He was old enough to know that you really shouldn't do that kind of thing to a tiny little boy. So I'm not going to forgive.
Let's see what the novice makes of that.
Also, thank you for mentioning Fine Fare. Rebecca, was Fine Fare, did that ever actually... No, I think it's a Midlands Northern thing, absolutely. And I happen to know the one, because I used to live for a while in Morecambe.
Are they gone?
Yeah, it was just like, that was that was a voice from the past, or a name from the past, anyway. But I'm absolutely staggered here that young brother is 5 years old.
5.
Yeah,
yes.
And I mean, what's he doing watching the Daleks? I was terrified, still am. But elder brother Simon should not have allowed him to be watching the Daleks at 5, and I hold him doubly responsible for that, and the parents. How can they hand out thrashings when they should know better? So on this occasion, none of that household are forgiven, because they were just horrendous.
Brother Matthew.
Good point. I mean, it's the parents' fault. Well said, Nige. I am going to somewhat controversially say that this is fine, because I'm going to say that the younger brother, though, will have always, for years afterwards, had the sort of adrenaline pumping every time he saw the Daleks in Doctor Who. It will have, I think, enhanced his viewing experience of Doctor Who, and so therefore, for me, nothing to forgive. I think definitely forgiven.
Well, they were this week's confessions. Very good, I thought. I'm not sure you'd have forgiven anyone. It might have provoked a little tale of your own, some secret that you've been harbouring beneath your chest for a long time. Anyway, if you have, send it in. We'll have a laugh. confessions@bbc.co.uk. No broken laws, very little itching powder, and let's say no hair removal, and they're the rules, basically. More in a week.
BBC